Hello, everyone. My name is Mickey Spirit. I just wanted to personally say welcome to the Healing Half. For those of you who haven't met me before, I am a musician, author, and talk show host of tonight's show, which is hopefully going to give you 30 minutes out of your very busy, very stressful, very chaotic week to pause, focus on healing, and learn how we can help other people out, which is something I think we all need a little bit this time of 2020, right? So, just a little background on myself before we get to our phenomenal guest tonight, who's going to talk to us about her adoption story. Is my mom died when I was 13 from cancer, and I spent 10 plus years avoiding feeling, pretending I was fine, and doing everything I could to just be normal and be like the person I was before she died. As anybody who's had a major loss knows, is you can't not be changed by loss. So eventually I had to face the music and I had to process my grief. And I realized that so many of us are like me, where it's a lot easier to run. It's a lot easier to be busy, and it's a lot easier not to lean into our emotions because it's hard. It's hard to go through it. But on the other side of that hard work is freedom and joy. And that is what the show is about. It's about addressing our wounds and learning how we can help other people. And tonight's story is going to be so phenomenal, as we're going to learn all about her adoption story, her testimony, her faith throughout it, as well as hopefully hear some things about what people like me who do not know and much, if anything at all, about adoption. What do we say that's going to help? What have people said in the past that was really not appropriate, even though they meant well? And hopefully, through these conversations that we have on the Healing Half, we can be a stronger community who is more insightful and able to be kinder to those around us. So that's what's in store for us tonight. I cannot wait to have you here. Hello to everyone in the chat. It's so great to see you. Drop a hi. I love looking at all of your comments. And if you are brand new, please subscribe to this channel by just liking the page on Facebook or YouTube, as well as join my email list. I'm going to make sure if you are on that list, you're going to have access to Tyson's lyrics, which we'll get to here in a second, as well as the replay link and any notes from tonight's show, as well as a lot of other resources that would be good for you to have in your back pocket when it comes to this stuff. Because I think if 2020 has taught us anything, it's that expect the unexpected. We are all going through so much right now that it can't hurt to learn and to process and to have resources. And as a little bonus, for those of you who are on my email list, you get my grief workbook, which is My Heart Still Remembers, for free. And around the holidays, it is never more important to process your grief and give it space in your life. And my book, My Heart Still Remembers, which is available on Amazon as well if you prefer that, is a really hold your hand through that process, because I remember what it's like to not know where to start when it comes to processing your grief. And that's my mission. So without further ado, thank you all so much for being here. Let's bring on our amazing, musically talented friend of mine, Tyson.
Hey, Mickey.
Hey, Tyson. Thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate being on here.
Absolutely. We have just like a bonus round with you. Not only do you get to hear a song about your adoption story, but then we get to actually interview you and pick your brain. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to give you the stage, let you introduce yourself, introduce the song. And for those of you who are watching, whether it's live or as a replay, the lyrics are in the comment section so you can follow along. As well as, if you like the song, let Tyson know. I'm sure she's going to go back through the comment section and look at if anybody liked it. So I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Mickey. This is a song that I wrote. It was a commissioned piece, if you will. The church I was attending at the time was having a Mother's Day conference, and it was specifically discussing the speaker's adoption story where she adopted their youngest son. And they said, "Hey, you're adopted. You want to sing a song about adoption for our Mother's Day retreat?" And, um, you know, gut reaction was, "No, I don't have, it's not like the Christmas section of the hymnal where there's several songs to choose from, so it was apparent that I was going to have to write something, and I thought, well, okay, you write songs occasionally. This should be something that should just naturally um, come to you. And I sat there and it's like, you know what? I haven't really thought through um, my specific adoption story to the point where I felt like it needed to be sang about because it just didn't feel unique. It doesn't feel to me um, like it's that interesting of a story. And then I did what most songwriters would do in my position, and I Googled everybody else's story about being adopted. Um, and the more and more I read about people's stories, the more I also found some similarities in my story. And so this is a song, it's called Real. I was born one hot summer day to a woman I don't know. Though my story had a rocky start, that was a happy lifetime ago. Some people came, took me in, gave me a home, gave me the name, gave me love and called me one of their own. Can't imagine it any other way. So when people ask if I know my real family, I tell them they're the ones who lit the candle on my first birthday cake. They're the ones who cleaned me up when I smashed it all over my face. They read me goodnight moon and tuck me into bed. Everything you'd want a family to be. Different blood runs through our veins, but they're still real to me. I didn't get his bright blue eyes the way that my sister did. On the surface I don't fit in, and I've heard people whisper that apple fell far from the apple tree. But I know how lucky I am, so it never bothers me. When people ask if I know my real family, I tell them they're the ones that made me play piano, even though I complain. They're the ones who said keep it up, you know you'll thank us someday. They sat through endless recitals to hear that same song, everything you'd want a family to be. Different blood runs through our veins, but they're still real to me. I know my life didn't have to turn out this way. I know it's just a little glimpse of God's grace. So when people ask if I know my real family, I tell them they're the ones who stood by me and walked me down the aisle. They're the ones who gave me away with tears of joy and a smile. They're the ones I see around the dinner table at every single holiday. Different blood runs through our veins, but they're still family. Yeah, they're still real to me. I was born one hot summer day to a woman I don't know. Though my story had a rocky start, that was a happy lifetime ago.
Bravo! Bravo! I over here crying in the background. Tyson, you did so amazing. Thank you so much for being brave and sharing your gifts. I so appreciate that. And for everybody in the audience listening, let us know if you like that song, whether you're watching it live or as a replay. We are just so excited to be able to dive in, because you had some nuggets in that song that I was like, I have to ask about that. I have to ask about that. I have to ask about that.
I'm having a hard time.
Oh, 1 second. We're just going to work on audio for a half second. Let's see. Tyson, I'm going to bring you back on here. Can you hear me okay? Test, test, test.
I'm catching glimpses of you. Can you say something?
Hello. Test, test, test.
Let me.
Hey, this is what the healing, we always have. Perfect. You come on back. Can you hear me now? Test. Well, that's okay. She's going to be right back. You got to roll with the punches, right? On it. So while she's coming back, I am going to kind of give her intro for the show. So Tyson and I met at songwriting group, which is so much fun. And I know her faith is so, so, so important to her. So I wanted to ask her on the show. Can you hear me, Tyson?
I'm back. It was being very strange, but here we are, and you're loud and clear.
Hey, perfect. No worries. By God's grace, right? The show is always. But the reason why I wanted to talk about adoption, because I talk a lot about grief on the show. That's like the thing I talk about all the time because of my mom's story and a bunch of other stories of people that I've interviewed. Grief is something a lot of people deal with. But the show is about healing, and it's about also learning how can we be better community members for people whose situations we don't understand. And I think adoption is one of those, at least for me, that I know personally I've had questions. I've had things where I was like, how does that work? A lot of the things that you talked about, like you mentioned, real family. Obviously, I take it that's not a term that's gone over well, which is why I can't wait for all of us just to hear your story, learn a little bit more about how we can be more compassionate and more supportive of the many people in our community who are either adopted, have adopted, or are hoping to adopt. Because I know there's a lot of hurtful comments that people have made to these that I've heard from audience members in prep for the show, that they were like, yeah, we need to talk about this because there's a lot of healing that has to happen. Hence the healing half. So Tyson, thank you so much for being here today. Do you mind kicking us off just kind of at the beginning? How did it start? Do you remember? Do you remember it?
No. Okay, so I was actually adopted at a very young age. I was adopted into my family when I was just a little over 3 months old, and I just kind of want to preface anything that I say tonight by saying, this is just my story. Mickey and I talked about this when we discussed doing this show. This is my story. It's not every adoptee's story. It's not. I have a very happy story, but I know there's kids who don't, who were adopted into families that were less than desirable. Some kids who, ended up in the foster care system and wish they could have been adopted. So just know that I don't pretend to be representing all things adopted. I'm just telling you something that maybe is insightful. But I was born in a suburb of Seoul, Korea, and when I was, this is how it allegedly goes. When I was 2 days old, my birth mother, my biological mother, she left me at the clinic I was born at and just said, send her to America. From the sounds of it, my biological father was not in the picture. And at that time, culturally in Korea, it was not well received to have a child out of wedlock. There weren't any type of support systems or government programs to help single mothers. And it was kind of a bringing shame on yourself, your family, etc. situation. So allegedly, the clinic waited a couple days, see if anybody would come back to claim me. Off to an orphanage I went. And then 3 short months later, I was adopted, flew over with a social worker and landed in the great state of Minnesota, never to leave again, to move, I guess. But my parents, my adoptive parents, I never refer to them as my adoptive parents because they're just my parents.
Right.
They had the belief that they weren't able to have kids. And so they're like, well, let's adopt a kid. And it was very popular, and not uncommon whatsoever during the mid 80s or however old I am, that people were adopting kids from Korea. There was a massive wave of us that came over. They actually ended up waiting for me probably 2 or 3 years, just because there was a lengthy wait and a long process. And in the meantime, they had a daughter, a biological daughter, my sister. And so her and I are actually only 1 grade apart. So that was kind of, you know, unplanned, but now there were 2 of us, and so, she's 1 year older than me, and she's the biological daughter of my parents and obviously has their traits and their mannerisms, and I'm not. I don't necessarily, I guess I do actually, but yeah, so when people say, "Okay, do you remember anything about, your life beforehand?" It's like, "Well, what do you remember from when you were 3 months old?" So no, this is all I've ever known. Now there's a lot of kids who were adopted when they were older. I don't, and so they would definitely have a different story than I do, but, um, I don't know any different, so
No, thank you so much for sharing that, and we totally get it. Yep, you are Tyson. You don't
yeah.
have to speak for everybody, just like how my grief story doesn't speak to everybody. Absolutely, we're right with you. So we appreciate you sharing your story. So my first question that I kind of had, again, just to kind of like really get into the meat of it and kind of answer some of these tough questions that I think a lot of people
Yeah.
maybe have but are too afraid to ask. So
Mhm.
I'll fall on the sword. I'll do it.
Go for it.
What How old were you when you kind of realized I don't how did you when did you like realize like, oh, I don't look like these people?
There was not really an age, it was just always extremely apparent, like, I obviously don't look like these people. Um, and I live in a really small town, so even just having other people who weren't born in the United States was not super common. However, my parents were never trying to hide the fact that I was adopted. I mean, it was going to be obvious at some point, like, "Hey, you're Asian," and they are not. So there
Right.
wasn't ever a point where I said, "Oh, I'm different than my family." Now, that being said, the benefit of being in a small town, it wasn't like everybody who I came up to in school to like, "Hey, how does this work? Your sister is Caucasian and you're not." I mean, everybody just knew you kind of and knew your story. One of my really good friends is also adopted from Korea and has, Caucasian white siblings, or however you'd refer to them. And it was just kind of known because when you have a class of 150 people, it's not a mystery. Now I know there are people, I know of people who are, of the same race or background of their adopted families, and they try and keep it a secret from you know their children, and I that's their parents' decision, but that was never my case. My parents were always super supportive of trying to encourage me to learn about the Korean culture too. I actually went to summer camp every year, like with like hundreds of Korean adoptees, and we all just got to learn about the Korean culture, eat the food, just mingle and be with other
Oh, wow.
families who were like that. So um, and I remember starting that at, like, kindergarten, a very, very young age, and, it was just such a great thing for my family to do for me, just to be like, "Hey, you're different, but, celebrate it and learn about it," and yeah, so they were never trying to hide it, and it was gonna come out anyway. Were there some instances where it's like, "Okay, it's very clear that I'm different?" Like, even today, if we go out to eat with my husband and my family, they assume that's my husband's parents because, surely I wouldn't be their kid. And, it just is what it is. And I realized kind of in like the fifth, sixth grade, kind of your formative years in life that, I can either let it get to me and bother me, or I can just, I mean, move on with life. I'm happy to answer questions about, adoption from other people, because I would rather they ask me than to continue and live in ignorance or say something hurtful to somebody who would take it very personally, if that makes any sense.
Right.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. I loved that camp idea. Do you mind letting us know what was the name of is it still
It's
around? Is it
I think it's still around because I'm hoping to take my kids there once they're a little bit older. It's called Camp Kimchi. Kimchi is like the staple fermented cabbage, traditionally cabbage dish of the Koreans, and I loved it. I mean, it was so much fun. We got to dress in traditional Korean dresses and learn taekwondo, and the food was so good. It was really fun. So like I said, I think it's still going, and I hope to bring my
That's
kids there someday.
amazing.
Yeah, it was really
I
fun.
love that. Yeah, cause right. That is so amazing. That is so perfect. Can you tell us a little bit about how connecting to that part of you that obviously you might not get out in small town Minnesota?
Mhm.
Did you do you think that was important? What would you encourage other people who might be in that boat on might be saying like, "Oh, but is that reminding you of, the fact that you're not there anymore? Is it hard for you?" What would you say to people like that?
If anything, I would think it was important for me to learn, and this is just me again, but it was important for me to learn about it because people would say, "Well, what do you remember?" It's like, "Well, I don't remember anything." "Okay, well, do you speak any of it?" It's like, "No, I didn't speak at 3 months." So I just felt like it connected me to it, so I had some knowledge about
Mm,
it and got to experience it, because I've only been back to Korea one time, and that was just a few years ago, actually, and that was a very strange but fun experience, just going back. And if you wanted to get super deep about it, oh, I didn't really belong here, and then I went to Korea and people assumed I would speak Korean and I didn't, and oh, it was, no, it really wasn't like that. It's like, okay, I'm not without country here. It was just interesting to see that perspective. But I thought it was super important for me to learn about the culture. My sister got to go along so she could learn about the culture. Realistically, it was important just to be with other kids who were like me. I didn't feel like I craved that and I needed that, but I know there were certainly kids who attended who that was really important to, just to know that they're not the only ones whose family looks like this, whose background
yeah.
looks like this. So, yeah, no, it was a really great experience, and if there were an opportunity for other kids to do something along those lines, I would encourage it certainly. Mhm.
I love that. I think it's so cool, and then you're gonna teach your kids, about that part of them
Mhm.
too.
Mhm.
That's so amazing. And let's go back to South Korea for a
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about, do people ask you about your real mom? Oh, I shouldn't even say
No,
that
no,
term.
you're
What
fine, you're
what should
fine.
I say instead of that?
People ask me
Open
that a
mouth,
lot.
insert
Yeah.
foot.
No, no,
Right.
you're fine. And people do ask that because you know what? There are a lot of people, especially nowadays, if they're adopted and they have like an open adoption where they actually have a relationship with their biological families. And there's certainly cases like that. Mine is obviously not when I was adopted, you may have received your correct birth date. You may have received your parents' actual names just to kind of, uh, to protect their anonymity. A lot of times you would get the wrong information. So people often say, do you know your real parents? Do you know your real family? I'm like, yeah, they live down the road and I saw them yesterday at dinner. But um like I said, I don't try to take that too seriously because I know people don't, for the most part, are not maliciously coming at me like that. Theoretically, I would say that those are my parents, and then
Yeah.
when they ask, it's were your biological parents or your birth parents, and
Right.
I get that's probably like question number one that I get. Um, other than, "Are you okay if I ask you some questions about being adopted?" And for me personally, I think that's very important because maybe some people don't like to talk about it, but for me, I'm always like, "Sure, ask away," because I don't think like, "Oh, there must be some pressing questions that people have about it." But, so, yeah, so when people say and that's where the song kind of came from, "My real family," it's like, well, no, my real
Mm,
family is my adopted family. That's all I know. They will always be my real family. And people, when they ask about my biological family, what do I know about them? Or do I want to know? That's the second question I often get. Do you want to meet them? Do you want to know more about them? Um, the answer is sure I would. Is that going to change anything? Is that like my pressing goal in my life? No, it's not. Um, but it would certainly be interesting, when you're at the clinic and they're like, "Okay, talk about your family medical history." It's like, this would be a really interesting to know some of this, but I just get to breeze by it like, I don't know. I don't have a medical history. I don't have,
yeah.
and that's fine. I mean, it is what it is, and I mean, yeah. It is what it is.
No, I love that. Is it hard when people ask you, about, like, medical history? Like, does that rub is it a scar that is hard when it's opened up, or is it because this has been your life this whole
No.
time, not that big of a deal?
Exactly. No, because this has been the only life I know, there are certain there are certain just moments where you're like, "Yes, I'm adopted," and that is certainly a reminder of it, but I've chosen to just not let it become an issue, and so, like, if my parents say something absolutely embarrassing, as all parents are inevitably going to, I make sure and text my sister, be like, "That's your gene pool, not mine." Just trying to make light of it so it's not just
Yeah.
this thing that people like to tiptoe around, or um when we go out and we're all together and people kind of trying to you can just see them piecing together, like, how are these all combined?
Mm.
And I'll say, "Oh, those are my parents, but they're adopted." And so, just to try and, I don't know, make light of the situation so people aren't as uncomfortable around it. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no reason to be, so yeah.
I love that phrase. You are so funny. I just always love talking with you, whether we're writing music or just talking and hanging out. You always make me laugh so much. So thank you
Yeah.
for bringing that to the show. But you mentioned your sister.
Mhm.
Can you talk if you're comfortable? We don't have to
Yeah.
go in this
No,
direction
you're
if you don't want to. Was it? Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic of again? Here's this biological sister, and then there's you. Was there ever any issues or anything you would tell families who have situations where there ever jealousy, or what like wisdom would you have for situations like that?
Yeah, there wasn't ever in my specific family, but I know there certainly are in others. Like I said, through camp, I just got to know a lot of kids and other families where it was an issue. My parents were it just n- I was just their other kid. It wasn't like, okay, this is our biological daughter and um this is our adopted daughter. It wasn't ever like that. But I know I've seen firsthand some families where it's like very evident that, okay, this one's kind of favored. And I don't
Mm,
think that's obviously that's a bad situation in any kind of family, but for an adopted kid, it would probably just be like, okay, that seems to
right.
sting a little bit more. Um, so just to make sure that, like, it's just evident that there's zero favoritism, and
Mm.
I never experienced any of that. I have seen it, and it's really heartbreaking to just see it, and to ever think in any situation, adopt or not, that a kid feels
Yeah.
less favored than another one. That would just be really
Mm.
hard. So, yeah.
So true.
Mhm.
So true. No, I really appreciate that. I know it was really off-putting. One time I heard a mom talk about her 3 adult children and kind of said like, "Oh yeah, well this one's our favorite." And like she was like joking, but not joking. And it was
Right.
just like, "Oh my god." And they were all biological. So I'm
Uh-huh.
sure you're like in any situation that
Mhm.
would be really
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
Were there ever comments people made I'm sure to your parents, which of course as a kid you might not hear it, but were there ever things they told you about or you witnessed where they made comments about, your relationship with them that we as the audience could kind of learn to be like, okay, as I did earlier, like don't say real, and kind of tweak some language that you can give us insight on tonight?
There's nothing really specific. I'll just share. It was one of the lines in the song, and I remember going to visit my aunt, my great aunt Ruby, I think, and she was very old and possibly didn't know her faculties about her. But I remember visiting her at a very young age with my mom and my sister, and she looked at me and she looked it back at my mom and she goes, "Well, that apple fell far from the tree," and just like any type of you know like I said, I remembered it, which is means it must have impacted me at some point. Did it destroy my life? No, but any kind of comment that you're going to make that's going to make a child especially, um, feel singled out or feel different, I assure you they already feel different enough. It's fine. They're aware of that. Would just be something I would maybe be particularly sensitive towards. Um, I was fortunate enough never to really come across something super insensitive. I know that there were some discussions after my sister was born that people are like, okay, well now I guess you guys don't have to adopt, another child or something. Well, I was already on order, so I was coming, no returns. So I mean, just like with everything in life, whether somebody's grieving or hurting or, whatever, just to be very thoughtful with your words. I think that there's very little of that sometimes in life, and being
Yeah,
adopted is not any different. And like I said, for me personally, I try not to let it get to me, and which is probably why I don't have any concrete examples of specific stories that were like, okay, here's what somebody said and that hurt. Um, but just to be mindful, especially if it's going to be to a child or somebody who's been adopted. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Was there anything people said or could say that you're like, ooh, like this would be a really helpful statement? Like if a family just adopted a child, what would somebody say that's like an appropriate way of congratulations without it being weird, with in a way that people can support adoptive families in a world that sometimes can make off unintentionally harmful
mhm,
comments.
right. I would think, and I don't know the statistics. I don't know this specifically, but treat it like that person just had a baby essentially, regardless of how old the kid is that they are adopting, the child. I just keep saying kid like they're girls. The you know, okay, so you're adopting your child and maybe it's their first child. Do they have everything they need? Oftentimes they'll be adopting a child on a very short notice, especially these days. You might get a notice and a week later you have this child. My parents had a pretty lengthy runway knowing that I was coming. So celebrating that child like you would any other baby, um, and just being there for those parents because they if you're going to have a biological child, you have 9, 10 months of runway before you're like, "Okay, this is happening," even though you probably are never going to be ready. That's not necessarily the case with, you know, an adopted child. You might not get maternity leave wherever you're going to be or
Mm.
paternity leave, so there might not be the same social supports in place. Um, so, still bringing over a meal or volunteering to watch their dog for a while or taking their other older child out to play so the parents can have individual time with the child. Getting the other child that they already have like a gift, like I'm a big sister, I'm a big brother, just things like that. And just, if you said what are things that can help the adoptive families, I would also add things that would help as an adoptee, if they're old enough to answer, like, I kind of like when people ask me about it. It's like, oh yeah, that's kind of one thing. I feel like I'm kind of a average person and I don't really have anything exciting like to talk about. So when people are like, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you about being adopted?" I'm like, "Oh, no." So I enjoy that. It makes me encourage that people are interested in learning about that. Gives me something to talk about than the latest cartoons I've been watching with my kids. I just
Oh,
I just think I think it's nice to and
yeah.
just know that not everybody's gonna wanna, spout off answers, but I like that, so
Right. Well, now we've got one person we can ask all our adoptive
yay.
questions to that wants to talk
Right.
about it.
Exactly.
No, well, I am just so grateful for you for sharing. I love the idea. I'm just going to repeat it back to
Okay.
you. A, don't do what I did and accidentally use the word
It's
real.
alright.
Probably biological, the better route to go. Don't and treat it just like it's a baby shower. Like you
Mhm.
said, we have such a social joy when
Mhm.
people get pregnant and all these things. And I would like to think every adoptive parent gets that same
Yeah.
wow with an adopted baby. But I never even thought about doing a baby shower or of appropriate age
Mhm.
shower. And I think that's so amazing. So thank you so much for your
Yeah.
wisdom, for encouraging people to be in touch with their native culture. Was
Mhm.
that how I should say it? Would it be native
With their
culture?
yeah, with their culture, that's fine. And everybody asks me, these pressing questions about being Korean. I'm like, well, really, I personally don't fully identify one or the other. So I mean, it's just going to
Right.
vary from person to person. I don't know. It's
Absolutely. Well, you are American,
right.
as we
That's
all
it.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I am.
Oh, I am just so grateful for you, and I can't wait to maybe have you back on the show one
Yeah.
day, because you have so many other topics other than being adopted that you are so wise
Mhm.
about. So I'm sure we're going to have you back, whether it's to play music or give a testimony. But I cannot wait for everybody to watch the show, leave the comments, and just learn all of your wisdom that you gave us. So thank you so much, Tyson, for
Yeah.
being here and for helping us just learn more about the process and your story, as well as how we can help. Truly invaluable. So thank you so much for being
Thanks.
here.
Thanks again for having me, Mickey. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
For all of you guys here tonight, please let Tyson know if anything she said resonated with you. I guess the question that I would have for you guys in the comment section is, what point did she make that made the most sense or that kind of jumped out at you the most? Obviously, I put my own foot in my mouth on live TV and I used the word real instead of biological. So I think that's immediately one I'm going to be like, ooh, okay, I need to practice that and get better at that because I didn't even mean it. And, I didn't mean it in a bad way. But isn't that how this always goes? Most of the time when people say things to us, nobody means it in a bad way, but it can't hurt to correct them and say, actually, maybe we should say this. Whether it's saying real versus biological, maybe it's getting rid of the word committed when you're talking about suicide. That's a really easy switch, but a lot of people don't know that. There's lots of little things that we just get to humbly learn and admit, hey, I've got some work to do. And I think Tyson's message had a ton of amazing, amazing little tidbits in there. So let me know in the comment section which one rained out with you or resonated with you most. Be sure to like the page. And if you haven't yet, be sure to get your free copy of My Heart Still Remembers or order it off of Amazon. I got asked the other day from somebody who said, my friend is grieving. This is her first holiday without her husband. What should I do? How do I talk about that with her? And next week, we're going to be talking more about that. But the big little tidbit that I would give you, if you're trying to be like, what do I do? How do I help this person? Especially if they've kind of asked you for help, I would highly recommend giving them a copy of my workbook. Like I said, it's my own personal grief reflection process that I do that helps me feel more grounded. It helps me feel connected to my past in the sense that I am giving these people who meant so much to me some space and giving them some time. And when I sit down and I give time to people that I wish I had in my life, it's almost like the cosmos or my subconscious or whatever it is more at peace. It's like acknowledging the past and allowing it to flow presently with your future, from into the present and then into the future. And it's really hard to do that when there's a kink in that hose and we aren't processing it and we aren't giving it time. So that's kind of my number one tip for anybody going into the holidays who is hurting is make time for that person, just like how you would look forward to seeing them on the holidays. And if you want help with what to do during that time that you are giving this part of your heart to process, to be still, I'd really recommend My Heart Still Remembers because I think it's a great way to connect on a lot of different levels. So thank you all so much for being here tonight to learn more about adoption and how we can be better community members surrounding it. Thank you, Tyson, for your beautiful song, for your amazing story, and I can't wait to have you back on the show. Everybody have a very great rest of your week. I'll see you next Tuesday leading into Thanksgiving. Bye, everyone.